Okay, I'm in the building. Shout out to everybody in the chat room. Mohammed, big up. Mark, Yusuf, yes, yes. What's happening, people? Good evening to one and all. Mo says, big up. Hatman, love your work, G. All the way from Saudi Arabia. Yes, big up, big up. Alright, so let me do a little monologue right now, because I'm going to be talking about, as you can see from the title of the video, Gangsters Run the World. Now, I've been doing some research recently about the Italian American mafia, and there's a lot of parallels between the Italian American mafia when they were at the height of their power several decades ago, probably towards the early to the mid part of the 20th century. The Italian American mafia were at the height of their power. There's a lot of parallels between them and certain entities in geopolitics today. Okay, and specifically I'm talking about the Netanyahu government. Yeah, if you look at the way the Netanyahu government behaves and the tentacles that spread out from the Netanyahu government worldwide, a lot of similarities between that and the Italian American mafia. So, first of all, let me show you something here. And I will upload this as a audio MP3 maybe tomorrow or sometime later on this week. Let me just get this on the screen here. You guys should be able to see this. Okay, so the Italian American mafia, J. Edgar Hoover, this man right here, he was the first director of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, and any of you could go to his Wikipedia page, came out and publicly denied the existence of the mafia. Can you imagine that? He knew how powerful the mafia was, and in fact, I just watched an interview with a guy called Michael Francesi, who was a very prominent member of the Italian American mafia, and he was one of the richest people to ever be in the mafia. And he claims that the mafia actually had J. Edgar Hoover bribed, okay, and basically blackmailed him, and that's why he came out and said that the mafia doesn't actually exist. So here we have the first director of the FBI lying through his teeth, claiming that this extremely dangerous and pervasive organized crime, well, it's multiple families, but organized crime, whatever you want to call it, organization, claiming that they don't exist when he knows damn well they do. Another thing here, during the time of the Italian American mafia at their peak, there was a stigma attached to Italian Americans. So many Italian Americans were hard-working citizens and, just normal human beings, and they were horrified by the behavior of the Italian American mafia. Now, some naive Italian Americans liked the mafia. They fell for handing out turkeys on Thanksgiving and stuff like that. John Gotti used to do those kind of things, and other mobsters would try and get their own neighborhoods on their side by giving out money here and there and helping old ladies and stuff like that occasionally. But they also did a lot of destructive things within their neighborhoods. They ran extortion rackets. They used to frequent certain bars and places and basically take them over, and the owners of these places couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't speak up about it. They didn't want to end up in a pine box. So the mob guys claim that they never used to kill civilians. I mean, occasionally civilians were killed, but what they don't talk about is the fact that they were extorting civilians. They were bullying civilians. They were throwing their weight around and making lives for civilians miserable, and people lived in total terror of the Italian American mob. So there were lots of, honest, hard-working Italian American people who hated the fact that the mob was giving Italian Americans a bad name. They hated that. And so they didn't want to be stigmatized, people stereotyping them as all gangsters. So an organization called the Italian American Civil Rights League. Now remember, this was started in the 1970s, around the time when obviously black people were going through the civil rights movement in the United States, and there was also the feminist movement around the same kind of time period. So it was a time in the United States of political change and social change. And so organizations like the Italian American Civil Rights League were formed. But here's the catch, right? The person or the people who formed this organization to basically, ostensibly prevent Italian Americans from being discriminated against, the person who started this up was somebody from the Colombo crime family, a mobster. An Italian American mobster was the one who started this Italian American Civil Rights League. Just think about that. Joe Colombo, there you go, that's his name here on the Wikipedia page. Very famous Italian American mobster. Joe Colombo was the leader of the Italian American Civil Rights League. So the very person who was given the Italian community a bad name, okay, the very organization that was giving them a bad name, was then coming out and pretending as though they were defending the rights of Italians, and trying to prove that Italians are not. It's you couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up. It's so absurd, and you can see similarities, as I said earlier, between this and today's Anti-Defamation League, which is really, as far as I'm concerned, it operates like a satellite of the Netanyahu government in Israel. That's how it behaves, because Netanyahu and his regime are just psychopathic murderers. That's what they are. They're gangsters, and they hide behind the cloak of being involved in civil rights and all that kind of stuff, for Jewish people, of course. But they don't really represent the true practicing Jewish people. This is something I'm coming to find out more and more the more I look into it, because the people who are actually devout practicing Jews, many of them are completely opposed to the Netanyahu government, and indeed many of them are also opposed to Zionism itself and the existence of the state of Israel. But yet you have a mob, a mafia, operating out of the Knesset, who are echoing or mirroring many of the things that the Italian American mafia did decades ago. Now the Italian American mafia still exists, but ultimately they were not very sophisticated compared to, let's say, the Netanyahu mafia, right? Because the Italian American mafia were primarily interested in making money and obtaining power, yes, to make more money, but they weren't really, as far as I'm aware, involved in social engineering. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll discover more about the Italian American mob somewhere down the line and have to revise my position. But at this stage, as far as I can tell, the Italian American mob weren't really involved in social engineering. They were just all about making money and being the big tough guy on the street, etc., etc. And you had this kind of power struggle within the mafia, where you would get bosses of certain mafia families who wanted to stay under the radar and who didn't want media attention and public attention. And there was kind of a battle between those type of mafia bosses and the more flamboyant mafia bosses like John Gotti, right? Who was the last celebrity mafia boss, was John Gotti. And John Gotti killed the mob boss who came before him, his predecessor. John Gotti had him whacked, as they call it, assassinated. And the predecessor was Paulie Castellano. And Castellano was one of those low key mob bosses who wanted to keep the mob away from selling drugs, who wanted to keep everything low key, wanted to stay out of the media, who basically wanted to run the mob like a business. But individuals like John Gotti, for him, he was intoxicated. He was drawn to the glitz and the glamour. His ego couldn't handle flying underneath the radar. He had to be seen. He had to be chest out, and he didn't want to hide the fact that he was a gangster. And that's ultimately what led to his downfall, and that's ultimately what led to the demise of the Italian American mafia. Now, the mafia still exists. There are still identifiable bosses in at least some of the families, but they do not have anywhere near the power that they used to. At the heyday of the Italian American mafia, they virtually controlled New York City. It's not even an exaggeration to say that. They virtually controlled New York City. Because of the fact that they controlled the unions, the labor unions, if you wanted to get anything built in New York City during a certain period of the 20th century, you had to have some kind of dealings with the mob. And on top of that, if you were someone who was involved in casinos and hotels in Las Vegas, it was a similar thing. You had to have some kind of dealings with the mob in order to get that done, because Vegas was a mob town in its early days anyway. Very much a mob town. Really started by the mob, as far as I'm aware. And New York is the stronghold of the Italian American mafia. So people like Donald Trump, he's mafiaed up to the eyeballs. The amount of shady people that Donald Trump has done business deals with, you wouldn't even be able to count, because there's so many. Because Donald Trump obviously based in New York City, and then where did he have his casinos? Of course, in Las Vegas and also Atlantic City. So Donald Trump is absolutely, mafiaed up to the eyeballs, very close to many of the former mob bosses and all that kind of stuff. And this is another reason why I cannot for the life of me understand how people really believe that Donald Trump is a legitimate rebel and is bucking the system and fighting against the establishment. Donald Trump would be so easy to bring down if there was actually any impetus in the deep state in the United States. If there was any real desire or motivation to want to bring him down, they could bring him down like that. Do you know how many mobsters and shady characters Donald Trump has been involved with over the decades? Any of you guys look into the Italian American mafia and see how far their tentacles reached at one stage. It was fascinating watching the interviews with Michael Francese on the Vlad TV YouTube channel. And Michael Francese talks about the mob being very close to Don King. Surprise, surprise. Nobody's surprised about that. But the mob also being very close to Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton, of course, a civil rights leader. And I've heard for years and years and years, actually for decades, that Al Sharpton was dodgy. That Al Sharpton was not somebody to be trusted. I've heard this for many, many years. So for Michael Francese to come out and say that he knows Al Sharpton very well and Sharpton was involved in dodgy dealings and shady business, I'm not the least bit surprised by that. So yeah, the mob was extremely powerful. They had their tentacles everywhere. They had judges paid off. They had police paid off. But even so, because they were relatively unsophisticated compared to the mafias that run our world on a geopolitical level, they eventually kind of fizzled out. The Italian American families, the five families of New York, eventually kind of fizzled out. They still exist, but their power is nowhere near what it used to be, as far as I'm aware anyway. But the gangsters who rule this world on a geopolitical level, they're far more sophisticated than the Italian American mob. You see, the way the Italian American mob look at street gangs, because the Italian American mob is classed as organized crime, okay? They look at street gangs as being just jokers, space cadets, people running around shooting each other, and there's no form, there's no order, there's no structure to what they're doing. It's just a bunch of cowboys ripping each other off. Whereas the Italian American mob, of course, there was some element of infighting and what have you, but they did have a structure, they did have a code, they had a set of rules, and this is what allowed them to become so powerful during the 20th century, because they were more sophisticated than the common street gangs. And again, they aligned themselves with only other Italian Americans. You had to be Italian to become a member of the mafia. You could be an associate if you weren't Italian, but you had to be Italian blood, I think, on both sides of your family to become a made man, to become an official member of any of the five families. So again, you can draw parallels between that and what the likes of the Netanyahu government do around the world with their different cells everywhere and their Mossad and all that kind of stuff, hiding behind, it's like the Italian American mobster Joe Colombo hiding behind the Italian American Civil Rights League. Farcical stuff. But with the Netanyahu's, obviously a far more sophisticated organization, which is a government, obviously, so far more powerful, way more hitmen, way more money. And but it shows you how a small number of people can have an influence over a much larger organization. Okay, so the Italian American mob were small in number compared to law enforcement and judges in New York City, but yet at one stage they basically controlled New York City, and they controlled most of the drugs in the whole of the United States. So in certain areas they had more power than the American government. Think about that. If you're organized in the right way and you have the right, not even manpower, if you have the right mentality and the will to do certain acts, and you're organized and you're all bonded around a particular thing. I mean, they bonded around their ethnicity, and then they bonded around the mafia code and the ideology. And one of the interesting things is the mafia, the mob, is described by mainstream media, and even the FBI describe it as this, because I've been watching several documentaries about the mob. The FBI described the mob as a secret society. Okay, the mafia themselves call themselves Cosa Nostra, which means our thing. All right, and again, they're described as a secret society. And in their initiation ritual for the mob, the initiate will have his finger pricked or cut so that blood comes out of his finger, and there will be a circle of other mobsters who are there to be part of the ritual, and he enters this circle. As I say, they prick his finger so blood comes out, and then a picture of a saint will be put in his hand, and this saint, the picture of the saint will be set alight, and he will have to juggle the picture from hand to hand. And while he's juggling the picture from hand to hand, while it's burning and the blood from his finger is dripping on the picture, he has to say that, may my soul burn in hell as this saint is burning if I betray any of the rules or whatever of this thing of ours, this Cosa Nostra. So you can see that as an initiation ritual, the symbolic meaning behind it, right? The blood dripping onto the picture, what does that mean? It means that that picture, that saint, is now an embodiment of you because your blood is on it. So that saint now is supposed to represent you. And they say that when you go through the initiation ritual to enter the Italian American mob, you are born again. You know, like Christians, born again Christian, when they're born again, you're born again in the Italian American mob, and henceforth, this is your new family. Your actual biological family, they are way down the pecking order. They do not come before the mob. You know, one of the things you have to agree to when you go into the mob is that if you have a relative, your mother or your son, who's dying, they're on their deathbed, and the boss of the mob calls you at that moment when your child is on the deathbed, you have to leave your child and go answer to the boss for whatever he wants. You have to agree to that at this initiation ritual. But there are so many things going on there with the ritual, with the fact that you have to be Italian on both sides. You have to be of pure Italian blood so they can trace your roots back to the old country. And why is this important? It's important because in order for people to buy into something, to believe in something, to put their life on the line for something, there has to be something deeper than just ideology. Yeah, there has to be something deeper, and ethnicity is deeper than ideology. Because as I always tell you guys many times, most people, not all people, I'm not trying to tar everybody with this brush, I'm saying most people will bond around race first, and after race, then they bond around religion, then they bond around, nation, tribe, so on and so forth. And with the Italian American mob, obviously, they were a minority group from Europe who were one of the latest arrivals, the most recent arrivals from Europe into North America. And, they obviously faced a certain amount of discrimination. They formed themselves into their communities, and then upsprung organizations like the mafia. And again, they would use that ethnicity as something to bond everybody around in terms of their organized crime. So yeah, very interesting looking into the mob, the way they would operate, how pervasive they were in terms of infiltrating major institutions in the United States. The idea that today there are no organizations which could replicate what the mob used to do, isn't that farcical? Because today, if you say that there are certain families, you see the mafia, they had 5 families in New York, and these families were organized and structured and stuff like that. What I am convinced of is that in geopolitics there are also families, just like the Italian American mafia. It's a microcosm of the macrocosm. So in the macrocosm, in the geopolitical world, you also have powerful families, many of which we don't even know about, I would suggest. I think that the royal families are probably respected on the geopolitical scene, and I'm sure there are also, the Rothschilds and etc., but I've got no doubt there are other families who we're not so familiar with who are extremely powerful on the geopolitical scene, and I just see them operate in the same way, well, not the same way, in a more sophisticated way, actually, in a similar way to the Italian American mafia, but just more sophisticated, and they've obviously got a lot more tools at their disposal, more weaponry, they got whole armies and stuff like that, but again, if an organization like the Italian American mafia could have so much power over law enforcement, judiciary, certain politicians, the economy of one of the most powerful and richest cities in the world like New York, what makes you think that there are not families out there and organizations out there that have so much sway today over various different countries? Because I've got no doubt that there is. No doubt that there are, and I think that's how the world is really run. As I've said before, I think the world is run by the people who sit at the top of the social and economic hierarchy. Not the people who sit at the top of the political hierarchy. I think the people who sit at the top of the political hierarchy are just administrators. That's all they are. They're just pen pushers and button pushers and stuff like that. They're not the real people who sit at the top of the, the world hierarchy. Just as the way the Italian American mob controlled the unions, okay? And the unions, they had their leaders, their official leaders, but their official leaders meant nothing because it was really the mob who was running it. Do you understand? Same way with politics. You can have your prime ministers and your presidents, but the mafia behind the scenes are the ones who's really running it. And people will call you a conspiracy theorist, a tinfoil hat wearer, etc. if you talk about things like that. But yet here we have the Italian. I mean, look back in history. Just look at the way the Italian American mafia were operating. And you're trying to tell me that an organization can't operate like that in geopolitics? More sophisticated? I'm telling you they can. And I'm absolutely convinced that they are. And I'm not just talking about one organization like that, several. And several organizations like that which have an understanding. And organizations like that which have got a far greater knowledge of the occult, a far greater knowledge of human behavior, and a far more sophisticated in various different ways. Because I've mentioned many times the individual named Eric Bernays and the kind of things that he was employed to do. He was basically what they call the godfather of propaganda, and he was deeply interested in human psychology and how to manipulate human behavior. And of course he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. That's not a coincidence. So imagine a mafia that had that level of intellect within it, like a Edward Bernays. That will give you some kind of idea as to how sophisticated the mafias that run our world really are compared to the Italian American mob, who they probably see as primitive. Anyway, let me go on to some questions from you guys now. One sec. Let's pop this chat out. Alright, who's in the chat room here? We got Henry Atkins, G-Man Boxing, Big Up, Gennady Alvarez, Mohammed Rashid. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard Michael Francis claim that Kennedy was killed by the mafia too. I'm not so sure about that. I think the mafia might have had a hand in it, but I suspect that for the mafia to kill Kennedy, there had to be people within maybe the intelligence community and the American government and the American establishment who gave it the green light. I don't think that the mafia could have just come in and killed Kennedy and then sailed off into the sunset. I don't buy that. I think that, yeah, they may have had a hand in it, but they were allowed to do it. If it was them behind it, I think they were allowed to do it. They were given the green light to do it. Mark says, was that Hatman? Edward Bernays said the best way to control the opposition, exactly, is to lead it yourself. Indeed, best way to control the opposition is to lead it yourself. But it wasn't Bernays who said that. I think it was Lenin. It was Lenin who said that, or Lenin who that quote is attributed to, Vladimir Lenin. Gaylord in the house, big up. Abdul Rahman says, what brought the mafia down? They really brought themselves down. Obviously law enforcement brought them down, but as I was saying earlier on, people like John Gotti, he brought the mob down, because John Gotti was such a narcissist. He had such a colossal ego that he couldn't bear to just be a businessman. Do you understand? Because his predecessor, Paulie Castellano, was a businessman. That's what he was. Yeah, Paulie Castellano had people killed if they violated the rules, but there are plenty of businessmen who have people killed. I mean, a guy like, for example, what's his name? Nicholas Van Hoogstraten. Look into Nicholas Van Hoogstraten. He's a well-known British businessman who has been implicated in murders, or at least one murder he was implicated in, and I think he managed to beat the case. And he also went to prison, Nicholas Van Hoogstraten, for throwing a grenade through a business rival's window. He went to prison for that. Nicholas Van Hoogstraten is a British multimillionaire. He's obviously of Dutch descent, but he's a multimillionaire. And look at the stuff that he's been implicated in, murders and violence and all this kind of stuff. And that's just a fairly low level businessman in Britain, Nicholas Van Hoogstraten. Yeah, he's a millionaire, but there are far richer and more powerful people than him. And in fact, if you watch one of the Van Hoogstraten interviews, Van Hoogstraten talks about rubbing shoulders with certain people in Britain, certain high level businessmen that actually scare him. And there's not much that scares Nicholas Van Hoogstraten, but yeah, he said he's been around certain people, high level business people in Britain, that give him the creeps because he knows they're so flipping serious and dangerous. But yeah, ultimately what brought the mob down was people like John Gotti, who their egos were far too big, far too, he was like, he should have been a boxer or something, or a boxing promoter. That's the kind of environment that he would have thrived in. But obviously that's not extreme enough for him, because John Gotti liked being a gangster. He liked being someone who's killed people. He liked being someone who instills fear. John Gotti loved all that. He loved the role, of being a gangster. He loved the glamour of it. John Gotti did so many stupid things in his career. And I remember when John Gotti was arrested, by the way, when he went down, or when he was convicted. I think it was in 92, something like that. I remember the time. I remember all that period when uh, the fall of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, because before that there was East and West Germany, John Gotti getting locked up, Nelson Mandela coming out of prison. I remember all that era, the apartheid in South Africa ending. So yeah, people like Gotti ultimately led to the demise of the mob. They weren't sophisticated enough, because the law enforcement became more sophisticated and the mafia didn't at that stage. So whatever remains of the mob today, and the mob still exists, I'm sure they're more sophisticated, but they're also probably a lot smaller than they used to be, because New York City in the 1980s and the 1990s was unbelievably violent. I mean, you're talking about thousands of murders a year in New York City. So in that kind of environment, you can imagine how the mob could flourish, because it was chaos. Whereas today, New York City is the safest big city in the United States. They've got the murder rate well under control. It's becoming heavily gentrified. So whatever remains of the mob in New York, probably a lot of them are into legitimate business now. I mean, maybe some of them, I'm just guessing here, might be into like white collar crime, like fraud and things like that, rather than what they used to do. Because what they used to do was like running numbers, extortion, loan sharking, stuff like that. That's what they used to do. Hijacking, they were always hijacking trucks and all that kind of business. Robbing banks. Abs Boxing TV says, do you know AK should retire? Amir Khan. Do I think he should retire? It's a good question. I probably think he should, Yeah, I would say I think he should, because the Crawford fight showed me that his heart is not in it anymore. And if your heart ain't in it, you're going to get even more badly hurt than you were already getting hurt. So I think it's probably time for him to retire. Henry Atkins says, do you remember or no, Billy and Boogie from London. They were definitely gangsters of some sort, right? Billy and Boogie, what part of London were they from? Aaron Duble says the mafia have hitmen and foot soldiers. The men in charge have troops and police. Indeed, indeed, exactly that. Exactly that. Alexander Randall says favorite gangster film of all time. My favorite gangster film of all time is it's a toss up between Goodfellas and Gangs of New York. I really like Gangs of New York. I really like that movie. Abdul says, Hatman, I seen the vid which you came across where the LDBC the LDBC guy claimed AJ Duck Miller. How are these guys so deluded? It's actually scary. Yeah, it is scary. It is indeed scary. I've got no idea how they can be that deluded. Abs Boxing TV says I'm leaning more towards Crawford rather than Spence now after that performance. Your thoughts? I still think it's a very, very tough fight for both of them. Yeah. Big up Jason Brown. Muhammad says, "Hi man, why didn't you go pro in boxing?" I was working full time and I never wanted to turn pro and be just a regular small hall show fighter because I had friends who did that and I know how difficult it is. So if I was ever going to turn pro, I wanted to win something major in the amateurs and therefore attract the attention of one of the big promoters because it will help you so much, as a young professional. But I was working and I couldn't really train the way I wanted to train because of the hours I was working, going into my mid 20s. I was working so many hours. I couldn't train the way I wanted to train. And half of the time I turn up to the gym dead, you know. And I suffered a couple of really bad injuries. I dislocated my shoulder, which took about, I didn't have no physio and, all the other kind of stuff which professional boxers had. So I had to basically take a year out when I dislocated my shoulder. And obviously you take a year out and you're working and your life is going here and there. And yeah, life happened basically. In order to, I was only ever going to turn pro if, if all the stars had lined up, all the planets had lined up and all that kind of business and everything was right, then I would have turned pro. But it weren't gonna happen. I didn't want to just be an average fighter. I wanted to be a top fighter. Abs Boxing says Gangs of New York is one of my favorite films too. Henry Atkins says, Dunno, they were doormen for a lot of raves. Wiley raps about him in a song called Gangsters. Billy and Boogie. I don't know. I've known so many gangsters in London, like, I couldn't even tell you all of them. Wiley will know a lot more gangsters than me, 100%, because Wiley was a music man. He was everywhere. He was in South London, East London, North London, networking with everybody. Wiley knows a hell of a lot of people, and he would have heard of a lot of people. Whereas I didn't really know much people outside of my area. I heard of people now and again in different areas and stuff like that, but I only started knowing about gangsters in other parts of London when I was working. I started working with people from other parts of London, like people from East London, and I started hearing about the gangsters over there and stuff like that. But growing up, I didn't really know much about people outside my immediate area, to be honest. Alexander Randall says, Hatman, have you seen the interview where Khan says he was told he had 5 minutes, then when asked why he didn't take it, he said he didn't know? I ain't seen that interview, but, Khan's gonna say, he's gonna say whatever. He's gonna say whatever. Gennady Alvarez says, can Eddie Hearn defeat Al Heyman and take over America? Um, I will see, man. I don't want to make a call on it. Jason Brown says, Hatman, did you hear about the Jamaican father Fowl getting murdered? I didn't. He was alive up until recently, right? Because Father Fowl got arrested and imprisoned in the UK for possession of all kind of cocaine, and he was selling all kind of crack and stuff like that. And I think he got deported back to Jamaica, right? So I'm assuming he got murdered in Jamaica, and it must have been fairly recently in the last couple of years because um, I swear I checked. Hang on, let me 1 second, because I did wonder what happened to to Father Fowl. These yardy names. Oh yeah. 1 second here, peeps. Father Fowl. Uh, I saw some video of Father Fowl at some bashment, some rave in Jamaica. Oh, what? Okay, this is a video here. Father Fowl's Nine Night in London. A massive crowd from all over the UK. Oh, I guess this is commemorating him, right? Oh, wow. The Father Fowl motorcade heading to his final resting place. So he must have died recently. Let me Google it. Sorry, I'll get back to your comments in a sec. One second. Father Fowl. Okay, British link-up boss Father Fowl killed by a gunman. Popular music promoter Father Fowl was shot and killed near Halfway Tree in St Andrew last night. Okay, Halfway Tree. That's where Damian Marley grew up. One of Bob Marley's kids. Yeah, he was found in 2004. All right, yeah, I said he's dead now. You know, when you look at the gangsters in Jamaica, like Dudus and Father Fowl and those guys. Um, let me get this up on screen again. Yeah, when you look at the Jamaican gangsters like Dudus and Father Fowl, like a lot of people from those communities, especially Dudus, they come out and support. You know, like when Dudus was fighting extradition and all that kind of stuff, they had a massive shootout in uh, his garrison in Jamaica, where these people were basically trying to, prevent the man from being captured by the police. And how many people died? Was it like 70 people or something crazy? It's crazy. Um, it just showed the love that they had for the man. But at the same time, it's like the lesser of two evils, right? It just shows how terrible a job the Jamaican government is doing and how terrible a job the police are doing, that people in the local community would side with someone like Dudus, because Dudus is not a good guy. Dudus is someone who, to become a don in a Jamaican ghetto, or in a garrison as they call it in Jamaica, to become a don, the amount of dirt that you have to do to become a don is crazy. I saw some documentary where they were saying that Dudus took a chainsaw to a live human being. That's what we're talking about here. You have to be so grimy to reach the level that Dudus has reached. You can't possibly be a good human being. But again, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sure Dudus did a lot of good things for his community, but what was he doing for the next community? Wasn't the next community suffering, or the community down the, you know, down the way suffering because of him. How many people did he kill? How many people did his soldiers kill? Because I remember when there was that whole free Dudas thing, and so many people that I knew were just talking about free Dudas. People that are not even from, well, Jamaicans, but they never grew up in Jamaica, and they certainly weren't from the area of Jamaica that Dudas reigned over, and they're talking about free Dudas. Why free Dudas? Even with John Gotti, right, the Italian American mobster. I remember there was a group, a band back in the days called the Fun Loving Criminals, and they did a song called Free John Gotti. Free John Gotti for what? Like, come on. What are you freeing him for? Free John Gotti, the king of New York. Incredible. Alright, sorry. Let me get back to the questions here. Alright, Gas Gang. The Gas Gang is still is. I've got no idea. Anything to do with the new, um, the new gangs and stuff like that. I've got no idea. I'm not on the roads no more. I don't know nothing about these youngsters. I've heard of the Gas Gang, right? I think it stands for Guns and Shanks, right, in Brixton. But I don't know whether that's still a thing anymore, or what they're up to. I've got no idea. Um, Errol Spence Jr. says, "Yo, Hatman, have you ever been robbed uh by two boys?" I've never been robbed directly. No one's ever come up to me and robbed me, but I have been burgled. My flat was burgled one time, but I never got robbed. Um, Gaylord Fokker says, "Hatman, you mentioned a while ago that Kissinger is more powerful than most politicians as he's been around for years. In my opinion, George Osborne is similar. He is a baronet and won't go away. Your thoughts?" Well, George Osborne obviously hasn't been around as long as Kissinger, so let's see if he can stand the test of time. But Kissinger's been around forever, man. And the incredible thing about Kissinger is that he is brought in as an advisor to both sides of the political spectrum. He's brought in by Republican governments, and he's brought in by Democrat governments, which just shows you how farcical it is. Jason Brown says, "They were the British link-up crew, made millions from crack dealing in England." Yeah, that's Father Foul. Gennady Alvarez says, "Have you heard of Curtis Warren? Was he the UK's biggest gangster?" I think the UK's biggest gangster is probably somebody we've never heard of. Curtis Warren was he the guy from Liverpool? Was Curtis Warren in it? I doubt he was the UK's biggest gangster. I think the UK's biggest gangster is probably God knows who, man. Somebody from one of the aristocratic families, maybe. But if you're just talking about standard, like, working class gangsters who work their way up through the ranks, then I don't know. And of course you've got the Russian mafia. I remember seeing what's that guy called? That guy who claims to be a gangster, and some people say he is, some people say he isn't. Dave Courtney. I remember Dave Courtney saying that when the Russians came in, when they moved into London, he's talking about the Russian mafia, the game changed. Because the old working class, like Cockney, white, British gangster families, those families' power seriously diminished when the Russian mob guys started coming into London. Because back in the days, you would have firms, right? They called them firms, and they would control drugs. They would, some of them would be into armed robbery and stuff like that, robbing banks. And of course, there was a very heavy presence in the nightclub scene of the old school London gangster families. Yeah, they were heavily into the nightclubs and whatnot. And even when I was a bouncer, you would get certain instances where one security firm which was run by gangsters, would want to take over the contract at a particular club so that they could, make money from the club and also sell drugs there and what have you. And what they would do, it was they would go in and they would beat up the bouncers there. They'd smash everybody to pieces and they would take the door that way by force, like hostile takeover, like in business. But Dave Courtney said that when the Russians came in, they would just walk into the club, have a look around. They turn up in suits and stuff like that. They'd have a look around, and then a week later, you'd find out that somebody has bought the entire building. So there's no, turning up and smashing everybody to pieces with your minivan or minibus full of goons. No, there's none of that. Man, just turn up and buy the whole building. Just to show you how powerful they are. Jason Brown says in Tivoli Gardens. Yeah, Tivoli, yeah, that must be the father file. Henry Atkins says, have you seen any interviews on Vlad TV of China Mac, Chinese rapper? Yeah, I've seen the China Mac interviews, yeah. His dad was in the mafia and he has some very interesting stories. Not the best rapper though. Yeah, I saw his Vlad interviews. Josh Cosgrove says, alright, Hatman, do you think life is predetermined and everything happens for a reason, or do you think we have free will and life is what you make it? That's a very good question, Josh. I think that, like in a video game, right? I'm not sure if any of you have played a video game called Heavy Rain, but there are certain video games where you have multiple different endings, okay? Where you can make various choices in the game, and depending on the choices you make, you end up somewhere, you'll end up with a particular ending. I think life is like that, because in the video game there's a limited number of endings, and my personal, I don't even want to call it a belief, but my personal suspicion at this stage is that that's how it is for us, is that we all have a predetermined number of paths that we can go down. So we do get choice in terms of what we do in our lives, but we only get limited choice. I don't personally believe that anyone can do anything and become anything. I don't believe that. I think we're limited by our inherent character traits and also by our circumstances that we're born into. I mean, if you are born in Palestine right now, what are your chances of getting out of there and becoming a genius scientist or whatever the case may be? Very limited, right? You might not even live very long because you might get bombed and blown to pieces when you're 5 years old. So I think we have choice, but within a fairly narrow set of parameters. The best thing we can do is make the best choices which are given to us in our life. We're not all going to be given equal opportunities, and we're not all going to be born equally able. I mean, you could give two people the exact same opportunities, and one person is going to, and when I say the exact same opportunities, I'm talking about, let's say two people get the exact same job, two people get the exact same salary, they get the exact same qualifications, so on and so forth. One person is going to do far better than the other person because of the kind of person they were born. Do you understand? Because of the neural pathways and their DNA and all that kind of stuff is going to ensure that they do better than this other person who's had the same opportunities to some degree. So yeah, that's the way I put it. We all have choice, but within a limited set of parameters. We all have there's only a certain number of endings that our lives could potentially have. That's the way I see it right now. Jason Brown says Russians and Albanians. Henry Atkins says, have you ever wondered why people look the way they do. And I'm not talking about DNA, I'm talking about occupation. Why do gangsters all look the same? Teachers, politicians, it's like they had that path. I don't know if gangsters all look the same. No, I wouldn't say that. Teachers, politicians. What do you mean by look the same? As in physically the same? Or the way they dress? Errol Spence Jr. says, hey Hatman, do you still affiliate with your friends that you grew up with, or the friends you made in secondary school? To tell the truth, I don't. Nah, I don't. I don't, man. I still talk to, or I'm still in touch with one person I was in school with, but he weren't in my year. He was younger than me. So I didn't really get to know him until a few years after we left secondary school. I didn't really know him like that in school because he was, younger than me. Henry Atkins says, human batteries. Hang on. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. Human batteries. To begin with, human batteries. Abdul Rahman says, views on time travel. Will it ever be possible? I suspect that it might be possible, but I mean, who knows, man? Who knows? Who knows? They say the mind is infinite, right? And if you can imagine something, you can manifest it into physical reality at some stage, at some point in history. Because people who are of the esoteric and abstract persuasion will say that we create our own worlds by the way that we think, and we eventually will create everything that we think about. Collectively, I'm talking about the human collective consciousness will actually manifest everything that we imagine and think about. So if that involves time travel, I guess maybe they think we can do that too. I don't know, man. I've got no idea. I would certainly not close my mind to the possibility that there could be time travel. G-Man Boxing says, Hatman, have you ever considered doing a podcast on ancient Egypt? I actually have. I did do one on ancient Egypt a long time ago, but I did do one on ancient Egypt. Henry Atkins says, appearance, dress, body language. Well, I don't know about that, right? But what I will say is different strata, different class, particularly in somewhere like Britain, people from different classes of society look physically different. That's one thing you can observe among the natives of Britain. So white British people who are aristocrats, they look physically different to working class people. Their facial structure looks different. The body looks different. Do you understand? This is something you can observe. And the most pronounced example of this is if you go up north. When you go up to Manchester and Leeds and these working class, industrial towns up north, the people there look physically different to middle class white Londoners. They look physically different. Their face is different. The head shape is different. So I know that. The aristocrats look different. You know what I mean? Look at someone like David Cameron. Look at his face. Or Boris Johnson. These people who come from these wealthy, moneyed families. Look at Prince William. Prince William. That is not someone that could ever come from a council estate. Look at that face. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they look physically different. That's one thing I can say. In terms of people in particular professions like gangsters, I can't say all gangsters look the same. Gangsters come in all shapes and sizes, and some of them don't even look like gangsters. Errol Spence says, Hatman, are you scared of heights? Like, are you scared of planes and jets? No, I'm not scared of planes and jets. I mean, I don't particularly like flying, but I'm not scared of flying. I've been flying around the world for years, but I always feel like I'm pushing my luck, when I step on a plane. Um, but no, I've never been scared of flying, but I'm always happy when we land. Uh, as far as heights, I don't particularly like heights. I wouldn't say I'm, you know, necessarily scared, because I've been in tower blocks and all that kind of stuff and looked over the edge of the balcony, and I'm okay. But I'm not somebody that could work high up on some crane somewhere, or sitting on one of those steel girders eating my lunch, just casually. I couldn't do that. So I got vertigo to some extent if you're talking about being, standing on some unsecured girder or something on the top of a skyscraper. I definitely get vertigo then. Jason Brown says, disappointed about Jarrell Miller. I thought he was the real deal. Can you do a podcast on PEDs and sport? I'd have to do more research, because all I know about PEDs and sport is really boxing. I don't really know much about PEDs outside of boxing. Obviously, there's, over the years, the stuff that happened in athletics, but in terms of the other sports, I'd have to do a lot more research. Alexander says, hey man, what made you want to travel and live in different countries? Was it to do with work, etc., or just wanting to experience different cultures? Well, I was born in a different country for one, so and we always moved about. We came from the Caribbean when I was like 7, 8 years old, and then when we first arrived in Britain, we were moving around. We first lived in Cardiff, and then we moved to London, and then I moved eventually to different parts of London, and then my family all went back eventually to the Caribbean. So at that point, you're out of your comfort zone, right? Your family's gone. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna start looking for home elsewhere. So I started traveling places and doing stuff. Because why not? There's nothing really keeping me here. Because most people have their family here, right? So they have to stay here because this is where they feel comfortable now. But I didn't really have them kind of ties, so I was like, let me just go and do whatever. So yeah, I've always been a kind of person that likes change, because a lot of people get stuck. I guess it's human nature. It's normal. It's natural for people to get kind of stuck in their little groove, in their little circle of friends, their neighborhood, and they don't want to move. But I'm somebody, and I think a lot of Londoners move a lot anyway because of the transient nature of communities in London. So yeah, I was just used to traveling and going play. And obviously, when I was growing up, we would travel back, to the Caribbean and stuff like that for holidays and all that kind of stuff. And we went holidays all kind of different places, but we would go back home too. So yeah, I've always just been a person that likes traveling anyway, and I've been moving around and traveling most of my life. So it's not really a big deal to me to go to different countries and stuff like that. Felix says, live it, believe it, become it. Jason Brown says, different cultures have different looks. Henry Atkins says, big time, you can see it in their eyes. They've had a harder life, pain in their face. I guess you're talking about the people up north. Like, look at the people who come out of Liverpool, the physical structure of the face and all that kind of business, and compare them to the ones who come from London. It's different. They look different. I'm telling you. The bone structure and all that is different. Errol Spence Jr. says, Hatman, do you believe you owe your friends you grew up with, if you were ever famous or successful? For example, someone like Anthony Joshua said he felt he didn't owe past friends anything. I don't owe them a goddamn thing. What do I owe them? I mean, if they were such good friends and they wanted to help me or be good friends to me now, then they'd be in my life now. Do you understand? So there's no point in them coming back when I've blown up and become successful. What's that about? Anybody can do that. So I'm grateful to the people who know me now and the people who have got my back now, not the people who I used to run around with 20 years ago. That don't mean nothing to me. Jason Brown says, can you speak any other languages? Not really. English, I speak, what we learned in school, a tiny little bit of French, a tiny little bit of German. I mean tiny. And from the time I lived in the Middle East, I picked up a little bit. I probably speak more Arabic than anything else. So I do speak a tiny bit of Arabic, just to get by and stuff like that. But most people out there speak English anyway, so you don't really have to use it too tough. But yeah, I probably say I know a little bit of Arabic, and then French, German, and that's about it. And to be fair, I know a few words and phrases in Luganda, which is the main language in Uganda, right, in Africa. And at the moment, I'm trying to learn a little bit of Zulu because the girl that I'm seeing at the moment, she is from Zimbabwe, but she's from a tribe called um, what's the name of the tribe? I can't remember I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they speak a language which is very similar to Zulu, and basically her tribe is like an offshoot of the Zulu tribe. So I'm trying to pick up some of that language there. But you know what happens when you get older is it's much more difficult to learn things, particularly languages. I think there's a term. Is it called neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity, and that's basically your brain's ability to absorb information and learn new things and new concepts. Your neuroplasticity is at its greatest when you're a child, when you're an infant. That's when your brain has the greatest capacity for learning. That's why children are able to pick up multiple languages much easier than adults. When you get to become an adult, very hard to learn different languages for most people. Of course, there are always exceptions, but for me, it's definitely very difficult. Abdul says, have you ever been to the States? If so, how was it in comparison to the UK? Yes, I have. And how was it in compared to the UK? A lot more extreme. That's the best way I can describe the United States. It's a lot more extreme. The poverty is a lot worse. The wealth is a lot greater. The people are a lot more um, animated and outspoken in America. The racism is a lot worse. The sociopathy, the narcissism is a lot worse. It's just more extreme. Everything about America is like on steroids compared to the UK. The UK is a lot more subdued than America, just all the way across the board. Other than maybe the British binge drinking culture, which I think is more extreme than what they have in America. The British binge drinker culture is crazy. It's crazy. Errol Spence says, Hatman, do you easily cut friends off if you feel they have disrespected you? I would say yeah. Yeah. Um, but friends don't really disrespect me. I've never actually had many fallouts with friends. It's just been a case where we kind of just drift apart. I've never been someone that has big beefs and we got to fight, and that's never been me, because I tend to pick friends who are not that way inclined in the first place. Friends who are kind of reasonable human beings and they're not gonna get all emotional and want to turn into enemies overnight. Gennady says, Hatman, do you drink? Not anymore, I guess. I haven't had any alcohol for over a year now, so I guess I don't drink anymore. I used to. I was never a big drinker, but I used to drink here and there. but I haven't had no alcohol now for over a year. Earl Spence says, "Do you believe social media will ever end will ever end sites like Instagram or Twitter?" Are you saying, are you asking me, will Instagram and Twitter be discontinued at some stage? Is that what you're asking? Graham Coleman, yes, yes, big up. I'm cool, all good. Are you getting Days Gone this Friday? I may get it. I have to see, man. I got a lot going on this week, but I may get it. Henry Atkins says, "Did you hear about the measles outbreak in New York? Most cases were found to be from unvaccinated people." I heard about a measles outbreak in New York, and it was in a Jewish community. And yeah, I actually saw David Icke talking about this on his YouTube channel about the measles outbreak. It's some Jewish community where there's a measles outbreak. I'm very suspicious about um, the whole vaccines thing and the way that it's treated in the media, because it's very one-sided, and they don't want to let anybody argue the other side of the case. So I'm very suspicious about the whole situation. It's just big pharma's behind it, the government's behind it, the media's behind it, everybody's behind it. And the podcast I did a couple weeks back about vaccines, where I edited up that particular video, and I had audio, an audio clip of this video that I'd edited, and the guy was reeling off all the ingredients of these vaccines, and you're putting that into children, and you think, oh, nothing's gonna happen, there's not gonna be no side effects. Come on, bro. You're putting that into an infant, all those chemicals and dead cells from monkeys and aborted fetuses and all kinds of crap that you're shoving in a child, and you think there's going to be no side effects at all. Madness. Madness. And I'm not even one of these people that says vaccines don't work. I think from the research I've done that some vaccines actually do work and they do have some benefits, but I cannot for the life of me understand how you can justify people like me, my age, my generation. I had, I think, God, I think my mom said I had something like four vaccines. Five. It was a very small number of vaccines that I've had in my life, well under 10. And the recommended number of vaccines, I can't remember how much it was in 1986. I think in that podcast they were talking about in 86, and they were comparing 86 to 2017. And in 2017, the recommended number of vaccines is like 55. And in 86, it was like 11. How on earth can they justify that? Knowing how deep social engineers think in terms of the vision that they have for humanity and what they want to turn human beings into, transhumanism, transgenderism, all that kind of stuff. I suspect that vaccines are part of the program in terms of creating the human being that they, are looking to create. Vaccines are part of it, so I'm suspicious of vaccines. Abs Boxing TV says, "Hatman, would you ever raise kids in London?" No, I would not. Errol Spence says, "Hatman, knowing you only date black women, have you ever date more dark skinned girls in the past than brown skin or light women?" I mostly date dark skinned women. Dark skin or brown skin women. I don't usually go for light skinned girls. Felix says UK versus US is like AJ versus Miller. Put it that way. Graham Coleman says, "Yeah, that video of Chelsea fans trashing that bloke shop up, shameful. Being a Brit living outside of the UK, it's embarrassing." Gennady Alvarez says, who benefits from social engineering if people only live for 100 years max roughly? Do you believe in reincarnation? Well, I've talked about this before, right? If you are from one of those families, right? And in fact, let me back up. Me and you, all of us guys here right now, we think very short term, don't we? We think about, making our money, paying our bills. If you got kids, looking after your kids, trying to, save up for a pension, making sure your kids are all right. We think short term. Why? Because we're in the rat race. We're not making millions of pounds or billions or trillions. We always have to look at what's in front of us right now. We can't think too far ahead. We don't have the luxury of doing that. We have to worry about putting a roof over our head and a roof over our kids' head and all that kind of stuff. Imagine you are from one of these powerful, rich families. They don't have to worry about putting a roof over their head. Their money is long. Do you understand? They've got money that can stretch 2, 3, 400 years. Even if they stop making money now, their money can stretch that long. Some of these families. So when you're in that position where you don't have to worry about putting food on the table or anything like that, what are you then going to do? How are you going to occupy your time? Well, you're going to occupy your time by trying to play God. That's what you're going to do. Like the video game Sims or the old school PC game Age of Empires. This is what they're doing with us. To them, it's like a project, and the project will be your life's work. If you ever read the literature of famous aristocrats, royals, etc., they talk about leaving a legacy, putting themselves, cementing their place in history. Do you understand? They see their life in much more grand terms than we see our lives, because they don't have to worry about the things that we worry about. They can take a step back and look at the big picture and say, okay, I want to leave this legacy and pass this legacy on to my offspring, just like my great grandfather, who was this great king and he did this, that and the other, and he's the reason that we live where we live right now. I want to do the same thing for my kids. And this is another thing. These powerful families, they know history. We don't really know history the way they know history. These people know who their great 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 grandfather was. Like, for example, Prince Charles came out a few years ago and said that he can trace his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler. That's hundreds of years back. Okay, this is the kind of thing that these people are interested in. They know who their ancestors were because they come from these powerful families. They see themselves as part of a legacy. And so this is why, to them, they can be part of a much greater plan which extends far beyond their own personal life. Of however long they're going to live, 80, 90, 100 years, a lot of these people. They see themselves as part of a legacy that extends far beyond that. Most of us don't have the luxury of being able to do that. We're in the rat race worrying about our immediate future, or whatever's happening in our lifetime, but they see themselves as part of something much greater, But as far as reincarnation, I'm not convinced by reincarnation. I don't know. Maybe it's possible. Maybe it happens. I don't know. But I certainly, and science kind of backs this up, I'm certainly convinced that there is genetic memory, that we carry memories from ancestors in our DNA. So DNA is basically like a recording medium. It's like a CD or a cassette tape where your when as you live your life, you're actually recording data onto the DNA. And when you have your offspring, they are reading data that you recorded into the DNA. They're reading data off that. Do you understand? So that way, you kind of are reincarnated in a certain sense. Do you understand? And I think that might be what is behind people believing they lived past lives. It might just be some people, for whatever reason, have a greater ability to tap into their genetic memory, and actually get flashbacks of things that happened to ancestors of theirs. Now, that is probably a decent enough explanation for some people in terms of past lives, but then you get other people who claim that they were like Anne Boleyn in a past life or Julius Caesar. As far as that, I don't know. I'm not sure what that's all about. But I certainly do believe in, or I'm convinced by genetic memory. And I've also talked about just as you do with dogs, like if you breed dogs, you can breed certain character traits into a family of dogs by maybe getting the most docile dogs and breeding them together, or getting the most aggressive dogs. Like they did with pit bulls, how they created the pit bull breed is by breeding, the most aggressive dogs together, and then you end up with the ultimate fighting dog at the end. And I think, like with the royal families of Europe, they did the same kind of thing. With all this interbreeding, all this inbreeding, excuse me, all the inbreeding, they were recycling the same character traits over and over again. Like psychopathy was a very, very common character trait to find in royal families in Europe. So they're just all over the world, really, but just using Europe as an example, they're recycling this psychopathy because they're inbreeding all the time. So that, in a way, is a form of reincarnation. They're reincarnating the psychopath over and over again within the same bloodline. Yeah, big up Jason. The Vaccines podcast was excellent. Errol Spencer's man, nowadays going gym is so distracting because there's bare girls at the gym to look at. I believe women should have a gym made specifically for them. I mean, it depends on how. I don't know, man. It depends. It depends. I mean, some guys might go to the gym and they're out of shape, and when they see nice girls at the gym, it might motivate them to train harder, because the guy might feel like, okay, I have to get in shape before I can even approach this girl. So let me work extra hard, get my abs and all that kind of stuff, and then I can actually go to. So you're seeing what you want. You're seeing what the end goal is, or what the prize is at the end of the rainbow in the gym. So some guys, it might be motivation for them to see girls in the gym, but other guys, I guess, it's distracting for them. Depends on the person. Abs Boxing TV says, what are your goals in life, bro? My goals in life are to make the most out of my ability. That's my main goal in life, is to make the most out of the abilities and the talents that I have. And also to have a positive impact, as positive impact as I can, on the people around me and the people who come into contact with me, particularly on a personal level, to try and have a positive impact. I'm the kind of person who, I like to uplift people. I like to give people belief. I'm someone who gets frustrated by people who have talent but don't utilize it. So I've known many people in my life like that, talented people who, I don't know whether it's through laziness or lack of self-belief, but I'm always the person to get on their case and say, nah man, you've got talent, like you need to do this, you need to do that, here, let me help you. I like doing that. I like seeing people do the same thing and make the most out of their talent. So that's what I want to do. and share whatever I learn with other people, and hopefully they use it to help themselves and help others, Just have a positive impact as much as I can. That's my goal. Jason Brown says, what do you think of James O'Brien from LBC? I have no idea who James O'Brien is. Who's James O'Brien? Errol Spence says, Hatman, do you believe with your partner before marriage you should live with her or get a house together after marriage? I have realized that strangers show more love for you than your friends and family. What are your thoughts on this, guys? Um, well, whenever I start dating a girl, she has to go through a vetting period where I have to vet the girl, because you have to know, we're in an unfortunate situation where we end up having to date strangers. Yeah, this is not normal. Throughout most of human history, we've been living in tight knit communities where we don't date strangers. We date people who our parents know the girl's parents. We know who they are. We know their tribe and their basic backstory, etc. But in this day and age, increasingly, we have to date strangers, complete strangers. And because of that, you have to put them through a much more lengthy, or I do anyway, a much more lengthy vetting stage, vetting process. So I'm vetting the girl right now, you know. You have to see how she behaves in certain situations and so on and so forth. Because particularly now, um, I'm in a good place in my life right now. So, you want to see how a girl reacts when you're maybe stressed or, different situations. So I want to see how she behaves long before I start talking about how moving in and marriage and all this other kind of stuff. And as far as strangers having more love for you than friends and family, um, I wouldn't say that. That's not my experience in my life. Jason Brown says, "What's your diet like? Clean, healthy, junk?" And I don't really eat junk food. I don't eat um, burgers and pizzas and fried chicken, and I don't eat any of that kind of stuff. Very rarely, anyway. I just eat normal food, just regular food. I eat out, and I get takeaways and that, but the takeaways I try to keep them healthy. You know, like if I go to a Turkish place, I get a shish, shish kebab with the pita bread and the grilled meat, with the salad and all that. So I got a fairly healthy diet, and the older I get, the more concerned I am with health. Abs TV says maybe you should be a manager. Errol Spence says Hatman is mad because I've been subscribed to this Patreon for more than a year and I've never seen you do a video on haters or jealousy among friends. I don't keep them kind of people around me, bro. you know, I don't keep them kind of people around me. Jealous people and haters, and like I've got people like friends of friends. Yeah, there's one particular person I'm thinking about who's like a friend of a friend, and I know him myself, but I never really cared to, get close to him or anything like that because I knew the kind of person he was. And within his group, he's always in drama. He's always falling out with his friends. They're falling out countless times. They've had fist fights with each other. You understand? Like, I'm the kind of person where if I have a fist fight with you, I want to take it too far. You understand what I'm telling you? Like that's how I am. That's why I want to stay away from people like that because back in the days I used to take it too far. If it gets to the point where I'm actually having to put hands on you and you're putting hands on me, that's a major problem for me. I'll find it very, very difficult to be cool with someone after we've had a physical fight. Do you understand? Like, very, very hard to be cool with that person, particularly if it's over some bullshit. Um, so that that individual is always arguing with his friends, and these are friends he's known from school, arguing and competing, and this one is jealous because this one, uh, took this girl and he slept. It's all some fuckery and bullshit. So I stay away from people like that. People who are gonna be scheming around you. They're not friends. You understand? The people I keep around me are not schemers like that. Just be careful who you decide to hang around with and call a friend, and watch people's behavior. You know, I clock very early on. Like when you have a conversation with someone and you ask their opinions on certain public figures or whatever the case may be, you can get a gauge on how that person is going to view you. You understand? From how they view other people. Like, there was a girl a few years ago. I've spoken about this girl before. And obviously, when it comes to girls, there's an increased amount of envy and what have you compared to guys, although, with a lot of guys, there's envy too. But this girl was basically, at the time when she said this, I think she was unemployed. Was she unemployed? No, no, no. So, excuse me, she was working. But she's a single mum, working a job that she don't like. And you know the chicken connoisseur? You guys must know the chicken connoisseur. That little munchkin on YouTube who goes around reviewing chicken shops in London. And she hated the chicken connoisseur. She couldn't stand him. And I was like, why you don't like him? He's funny. She's like, no man, I hate that guy. Why does he get to make all this money going around eating chicken and I have to get up and do this job? I can't stand that guy. That right there is a red flag. That right there is a terrible character trait. Like, chicken connoisseur, he ain't boxing food out of your mouth. He's not the reason that you have to go work in a shitty job. Why are you envious of this guy? You see what I'm telling you? That right there, that there's no reason for someone to hate on him for doing what he does. So I stay away from people that have them kind of personalities where they just hate people for no reason, or hate someone because someone is doing better than they're doing. See, I can understand it if someone is boxing food out of your mouth. If someone like a politician or whatever is taking your tax money and doing some bullshit with it, I can understand if you don't like that person. But some guy who goes around reviewing chicken shops and people like him on YouTube, there is no reason for you to hate that and say, oh, he shouldn't be making that money because I have to go work. Yeah, I stay away from people like that for starters. Abs Boxing TV says, Hatman, do you ever feel overworked? All the time. All the time, bro. All the time. Um, Ever since becoming self-employed, I felt overworked. But being overworked when you're self-employed is way better than being overworked when you're employed. Because everything I do, even though I have to do it in a certain sense, I get to choose when I do it and how much I do it. So you get more flexibility when you're self-employed than you do when you're employed. And from a psychological point of view, it's just nicer, for me anyway. Other people don't like it. There are plenty of people who don't like being self-employed and they go back to working for someone else because they don't like the responsibility of being self-employed. They like the reliability of always having that um, paycheck at the end of the month. You don't have to worry about it going up or down or any of that shit. You got a reliable paycheck. But me personally, I like being self-employed, man. But Overworked, yeah, all the time, man. I work non-stop. I work like 7 days a week. Most weeks, 7 days a week, man. You know, in my day job and in YouTube and Patreon and all that. 7 days a week. Abs Boxing says, I hate people who get into drama constantly. Me too. Anyhow I come across drama loving people, I'm going the other way. I ain't got no time for that, man. Errol Spence Jr. says, Hatman, what do you think of confident women? Me personally, I hate women that are that gassed. Yeah, I think a confident woman is something I'm always suspicious of. And when I say confident, let me not say confident. A woman who's too confident, a woman who's too in your face, I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious that this woman either is a hoe or she has no respect. Do you understand? So she's either some kind of narcissist or she's a hoe or both. Because the natural way for a woman to be, at least if she's in front of a man who she's attracted to, is she's going to be naturally submissive. Like if she's a normal, emotionally stable, you know, mentally healthy woman, and she's in front of a man who she's really attracted to and she really likes, when you look her in the eye, she's going to look away. Do you understand? Her body language is going to be a certain way around you. But if she's all up in your face, and there's something wrong with a woman. Either she don't like you, or she's a hoe, or she's some kind of narcissist, or there's some other personality problem with her. Abs Boxing TV says, do you have a sense of what you want to do in the future, a possible career change? I've actually been looking into buying stocks. Yeah, I've actually been looking into buying stocks, which I don't really like the idea of it from, I guess, an ethical point of view, because I really wouldn't want to invest into companies and help out companies if I don't agree with the ethics of the people who run the companies and own the companies, you know? So I'm a little conflicted by it, but I'm at the stage now where I do have, a decent amount of savings where I can start looking at buying stocks in companies as a long-term investment, because that's, according to a lot of people, the way that you really make money is by investing in stocks, hedge funds and stuff like that. So I've been looking at various different hedge funds over the past few months and weighing up my options. Okay, big up Tall Pool. But as far as moving forward, yeah, I do want to do less hours, and I will. I will, but I feel like I'm going to be someone who lives a long time anyway. I was just saying the other day, like, I feel like the funny thing is, right? When I was in my early 20s, I told people at the time that I'm going to retire by the age of 35. And although I haven't retired, I didn't retire by the age of 35. I had reached the stage where I was, self-employed, and I had much more control over my own life and my own movements than I did previously. So even though I didn't reach that goal of becoming retired by 35, I don't know, in a way, I kind of do feel like I'm retired. I know that sounds strange because I work every day, but, a lot of the work I do is from home. I do go studio as well, but, a lot of the work I can do from home. I got a lot of the equipment here. Um, I don't know, I feel like I'm gonna live a long time, and because I'm gonna live a long time, there's plenty of time to sort out what I need to sort out and wind down the amount of hours that I'm working and have my money work for me. Like like I said, when you invest in stock, the money works for you. Abs Boxing TV says depends on what type of confidence she has. There is a difference. Yeah, I guess there is. Guess there is. Errol Spence Jr. says, Hatman, I found it overly creepy that people have an obsession with animals, particularly dogs. I've noticed most white people compare dogs to humans. Well, in the Western world, people do have this obsession with domestic animals. I mean, anybody who is from outside of the Western world, like natively, or you've lived outside of the Western world, you'll notice that the Western world are obsessed with domestic animals. Um, and I get it to a certain extent in terms of animals are innocent, right? If you've got a cat or a dog, particularly a dog, it's an innocent animal. You know, it's not out there scheming and plotting and doing all the other kind of stuff which human beings do. Um, so I can understand to a certain extent the appeal, but when you've got people who care more about a dog than people being blown up by bombs dropped from planes and stuff like that, that's a problem, you know. that's that's a major problem. Me personally, I'm not really into pets like that. I wouldn't keep a dog in my house. I wouldn't keep a cat in my house. Dogs smell, they're dirty, and they do have their uses, and there is companionship and stuff like that, but it's an animal at the end of the day, and it does smell, and it's not coming in my house. Definitely not coming in my bed. Henry Atkins says, was enjoying old podcasts of yours the other day. That witchcraft podcast you did was utterly crazy. Can you do more on witchcraft and voodoo and hoodoo? I'm fascinated by it. Yeah, I wanted to do a load of podcasts about the witchcraft. I'm gonna have to holler at my friend again. I got a Nigerian friend who's got some crazy, crazy story about witchcraft, stuff that he went through in Nigeria. And the last time I spoke to him, he said, "Yeah, I'm gonna come round," and because I wanted to do it just over Skype, just interview him over Skype, like I did with the Ugandan lady. But he's got kids, and he works two jobs, and he's got a stay-at-home wife, and his life is just so hectic. So I don't want to put too much pressure on him. But yeah, I'm gonna holler at him again and see if I can get this guy to, tell his story for you guys, man. Because I'm telling you, it's crazy stuff that he went through. Because was um he was basically within his clan. Okay, it's not just a tribe because he's a Yoruba Nigerian, but I think he's also in a clan, in a particular clan, and within his clan, he was supposed to be the new priest, all right, for their deity. So, or the witch doctor or whatever you want to call it for their particular clan, he was supposed to be it by virtue of his bloodline. And so, because he was supposed to be it, at a certain age, they put him through some ritual, which was extremely traumatizing to him. And that ritual was the reason that he fled Nigeria and came to Britain, and he's never been back to Nigeria since. And he says he never will go back. Errol Spence says, do you like dogs or cats, or have you ever had a pet? Man, me personally, I hate them because I don't trust animals. You never know what's going through their head. Yeah, I had a pet dog. You see, back home, in the Caribbean, the country I'm from, they used to have a massive amount of stray dogs. That's one of the things that it was most known for, was the amount of stray dogs. And as a child, I used to be out and about, playing. There used to be like long grass around the back of the house, and in the long grass, you'd find like um, all kind of different insects, grasshoppers, crickets, and all kind of things like that. And you'd also find stray dogs. Sometimes they'd run around in packs and whatnot. And one time I found a puppy, a little puppy, a stray puppy, and I took this puppy in. Obviously, when you're a kid, a week seems like a month. So I don't know how long I kept this puppy for, but I had this puppy in the back in the yard, and I made like a little cardboard box, kept it outside and fed it and all that kind of business. So there was that. And then later on, we did have a pet dog, which lived until it was maybe like 9. Um, but me personally, as an individual, I've never had a pet. I never wanted a pet, you know. Okay, Tall Paul says, how did you get so learned? You have an exceptional command of the English language. Well, thank you, good sir. I mean, anybody, let me not say anybody, but I've always been somebody who's intrepid. I've always been someone who's fascinated by um, learning things I'm interested in. Because I can't say I was the greatest pupil in school, but after I left school is where I actually did most of my learning, because there were so many things I was interested in. And whenever I meet people, I'm the kind of person who will ask you a million questions, especially if you're from a culture that I'm not familiar with. And what I discovered is that most people are not really that interested in learning about other people's culture. Most people don't care. They're into their own culture, and they meet someone from a different culture and they don't really ask them that many questions. I'm the exact opposite. If I meet someone from a different culture, I will grill you and grill you about every tiny little minute detail of your culture. And through that process, I'm going to learn a lot of information, not just about your culture, but maybe historical figures within your culture, political people within your culture, and the traveling as well helps you become more worldly and more learned, because you can put the world into context when you travel. Mohammed says, Hatman, how old are you? Old. Yeah, old. That's how old I am. I mean, I'll say that roughly 4 decades old, you know. Give or take, I'm roughly 4 decades. Errol Spence Jr. says, Hatman, would you ever date a girl that comes from a broken home? Yes, I would date a girl that comes from a broken home. But it depends what kind of broken home. It depends how broken the home is. You know, depends how broken the home is. Because a lot of girls, even born and raised in Africa, come from broken homes in the sense that their parents are not together. Because in Africa, you've got some men who just breed up women like there's no tomorrow. For example, I got a friend. Well, he's the cousin of my ex, and he's Ugandan, and his dad has got something ridiculous like 50 kids. I'm not joking. He's got like 50 kids, by loads of different women. So obviously he grew up in a broken home, if you want to call it that. The dad's rich. His dad owns all kind of different businesses and stuff like that in Uganda. He's got all these kids, and one of the things about African men, um, in my experience anyway, is that African men tend to be a lot more responsible even when they have loads of kids, than is the case with a lot of Caribbean men or even black American men, because there's a massive problem in the Caribbean, at least certain countries in the Caribbean, with our absentee fathers, and obviously a massive problem with that in the United States. But African men will still be around for their kids even when they've got loads of kids. The ones I've encountered anyway, they'll still be around for their kids and help them out as much as they can, at least when they're young. They won't just disappear and not try and have any relationship with them. Most of the African men I've known are like that, the ones who have got lots of kids. So my friend now, my ex's cousin, he always had his dad in his life, and he's got two sisters. Well, he's got more than two sisters, but he's got two sisters who have the same mom and dad as him. You understand? And both his sisters are married with kids. You understand? I think they're both in their 30s. They're both married with kids. They don't have, kids by multiple different guys. So, it all depends on, I'd have to take it on a case by case basis. You really have to look at the mum, right? If you're dating a girl and she's from a broken home, look at the mum. How many baby dads has the mum got? Why is the mum not with the dad? What kind of personality and character has the mum got? You'll tell a lot about the girl from looking at the mum. Because if her mum's been doing all kind of foul stuff, then there's a good chance the girl herself will follow the mum's lead. Okay, Tall Paul says, I often hear Hatman say that Christianity is dead in the UK. I know from my own experience that Christianity is not dead in the UK, far from it. Well, it depends how you want to look at it. Christianity in the UK no longer has any social power. That's what I mean by dead. Okay, and for example, when you go to the Middle East, Islam has a lot of social power. So I've got something that I'm comparing it to when I say Christianity is dead in the West. There's no social power for Christianity anymore. Christianity has it has rules and regulations and new moral standards imposed upon it by the media and by the government, etc. That's what Christianity has in the West, and there's no pushback. So they bring, gays and lesbians, and look, I'm not some, person who just hates gays and lesbians, but what I'm saying is, in Christianity, homosexuality is completely anathema to what they teach, right? It's not something that Christianity condones or allows for or anything like that. Homosexuality is just a complete no-no in Christianity. But yet you find the media, the establishment, etc., forcing this upon the churches in England. So Christianity has no social power. I mean, look at the way people live. Look at the promiscuity. Look at the number of single parent families that there is in Britain. Look at the number of, kids born out of wedlock. Britain does not live by any Christian principles. But yet if you go to a country which is still, religiously Christian or Islamic, people in general do live to a large degree by the principles and the ethics of the religion. Everybody's thinking about, oh no, you can't do that because it says in the Bible, or you can't do that, it says in the Quran you're supposed to do it like this. Everybody knows you're supposed to do it like this and you're supposed to do it like that. In the West, all that is gone. Christianity is dead. Nobody gives a damn about what it says in the Bible anymore. In the Western world, people are just doing whatever the hell they want to do. In fact, Christianity is so dead that in the media now in Britain, they mock Christianity all the time. They make jokes about it. They make jokes about Jesus. You know, like in the Bible, it says, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain." People take the Lord's name in vain in the Western world like every day. Like we all say Jesus, right? That's just part. That's one of the things that we just say. We say Jesus. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. So Christianity is dead. You understand what I'm saying? It's dead in the West. There's no social power to it anymore. Nobody respects it. And when I say nobody, I mean the vast majority of people. They don't respect Christianity. It doesn't have any power. It doesn't have any real political sway anymore. Nobody's worried about what this person at the church thinks, or the priest or the no one cares about that anymore. Errol Spence says, Hatman, if you had advice to younger kids, oh, advice, if you could advise your younger self back in secondary school or in college, what would it be? It's a good question, man. What advice would I give myself? Let me think. Hmm. I would probably, I'd probably like tell my younger self who was gonna win a bunch of boxing matches, so I could bet loads of money on it, and then become rich. That's what I'd do. But other advice, I'd say, hmm, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not even sure what advice I'll give, because I haven't made terrible mistakes in my life. I've always been, for the most part, a fairly shrewd individual. I haven't made terrible mistakes. I've done what I could do as best as I could. Most of the time along the way. Um, I would obviously, I was a bully, as I say, in secondary school, and I regret that. So if I could go back, maybe, and tell my younger self something, is to leave people alone, man. There's no need to be bullying people. Okay, Abs Boxing TV says, would you ever date a girl in a wheelchair? Nope. Nothing against anybody who dates girls in wheelchairs, but I personally wouldn't. Errol Spence says, yo, Hatman, I remember your classic video on Shakur Stevenson crying. Me personally, as a 19-year-old, I never cry in front of people or even family members. I see that as a weakness. I mean, even if you don't see it as a weakness, other people will. And you're saying you do see it as a weakness, but what I'm saying is, other people might say, that's not a weakness. You shouldn't feel as though it's a weakness to cry. But the problem is, other people do. That's why that's why I always say, when I have this discussion with females, some of them will say that men are silly for not letting their emotions out. No, men are not silly. The reason that men don't let their emotions out is because people will treat them differently for letting their emotions out, or for being vulnerable. You understand? People will actually treat you differently, and often in a negative way. Not just other men, but even females will look at you and treat you differently. So as a man, you don't have the luxury of expressing your pain as freely as females do, without negative consequences in terms of the way people treat you. You know. Josh Cosgrove says, what do you think about evolution? I'm not really sure, because there have been faked fossils in the past, and there are some arguments against the accuracy of carbon dating. I'm not sure too. I feel the same way as you. I'm not sure about evolution. it makes sense from a logical point of view that species will adapt and species will kind of find a way of changing themselves or breeding in a particular direction which is more beneficial, which ensures the survival of their particular species, and that may involve evolving. So I can see the logic behind evolution. It makes sense to me. But am I convinced that a shrew-like creature eventually turned into a blue whale? I'm not convinced. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not completely dismissing it, but I haven't seen enough to convince me that that is what happened. Um, I personally strongly suspect that the history of this earth and the history of all the creatures on it is far more mysterious than science and historians would lead us to believe. I think it's way more mysterious than that. Jason Brown says, you don't see many busy churches anymore. Another example right here of how Christianity is dead. In Brixton, there is a church called St. Matthew's Church. You know where I'm going with this, alright? Anyone who's from South London, you know where I'm going with this. What, I don't know if it's still there, is it still there? Below St. Matthew's Church? What is underneath St. Matthew's Church? Anyone who knows about Brixton, what's underneath St. Matthew's Church? There is no way, if you go back, 200 years, 300 years in Britain, that you would find a church, right? Like a big old church, and underneath it is a nightclub where people are drinking alcohol, scantily clad women, and all that kind of stuff. You would never have that back when Christianity still had power. But now they're holding raves in churches. Crazy. They're holding raves in churches, man. Errol Spence says, I don't really care about looks like that to me. It's more about personality and what she brings to the table for me. Henry Atkins says, Hatman, are you still involved in rapping or involved in music? Speaking of those who are talented, you have some wicked bars. You're like a vegetarian the way that you react to beef. um, well, I'm still involved in music to some extent, but not really making my own music. You know, I did actually find an old track, if you want to call it that. It's what they used to call a freestyle, right? Not off the top of the head. It's pre-written, but it was like an old mixtape track, which I don't think I've put out before. Which I recorded. I must have recorded it, I think, in 2000. I want to say 2008. Yeah, I think I recorded it in 2008, and it was a track where I was describing life in Brixton in 1998, if that makes sense. So I recorded it in 2008, which is like 11 years ago, and the track was about Brixton in the late 90s, in 98. I found that the other day. I might upload that here actually. I was kind of apprehensive because it's a bit dark, and I don't really want to promote that, but you know, I am kind of entertaining the possibility of going back into music in some capacity, but as I say, because I'm so busy, we'll have to see how that plays out. Felix says churches used to be sacred. Now you hear about people having sex in the front lawn of a church or even in the church. There you go. I mean, I don't know what like the Church of England is like inside the church and how the congregation all get along. But in the black churches, there is so much scandal inside the church. You're better off keeping your kids out of church than in, especially the girls. Yeah, the boys I think will benefit more in church than girls, right? But the black churches, there is so much scandal that goes on in there. If I had daughters, I wouldn't let them anywhere near church. I'm telling you, so much scandals in there, man. It's crazy. Henry Atkins says, please upload. I'm an aspiring music producer. I'd love to hear it. Alright, alright. I'll see what I can do. It's over a Mob Deep beat. It was like a freestyle that I did over a Mob Deep beat. And I played it to a friend of mine actually when I found it. Because I got a bunch of hard drives and I was checking what I had on all these hard drives that I haven't looked at for years. And yeah, I found this track which was supposed to go on a mixtape. The mixtape never ended up coming out. And I played it to my friend and he was like, no, that's sick. Like, you was going in on that track. Errol Spence says, Hammond, I think the best way to blow in music nowadays is to take the 6ix9ine approach where he was trolling everyone and dissing every rapper, because nowadays bare people are rapping and it's harder to blow. Yeah, a lot more people are rapping, and because it's so easy to have a presence in the public eye because of social media and YouTube, not only do you have to do it for that reason, but you have to do it just because, how can I explain it? It's no longer enough to be a good rapper to get big now. All right, and you will stand out if you're a good rapper, in the sense that your skills will stand out. But a lot of people don't really care about skills anymore. That's what I've noticed with the new generation of rappers. Because I've heard, when I've been at the gym and when I'm around certain young people, I've heard some of the rappers who are around now, and they're fucking awful. Like, I saw a video from Kodak Black, and this guy's got millions of views on his video and stuff like that. And I heard this guy rapping, and he was terrible. I mean, this guy in the 1990s, nobody would listen to it. I'm telling you now, there's no way that a guy like Kodak Black could come out in the 90s and get a big following. Impossible. Impossible. You had to actually be good. You couldn't be like that, you know. And then you've obviously got like the Migos and all these other like rappers. You wouldn't be able to rap like that and be taken seriously in the 90s. So today it's not really just about skills, or it's not really about skills at all. It's more about your personality and your persona. That's what people are buying into now. It's not enough to just come on and make good tracks and music. Nah, you have to have some kind of outrageous personality. That's what people buy into. So with the outrageous personality comes the trolling, comes, dressing in crazy clothes and having rainbow colored hair and having all these public beefs and pulling all these stunts. That all comes with it, because it's not enough to just make music that people like. You have to be this personality now. Henry Atkins says you rapped over. Where did it go? Yeah, you rapped over Mob Deep before. Something from the Murder Music album. Hell on Earth is my favorite all-time album, hands down. Sinister shit. Yeah, I liked a lot of the beats on Hell on Earth. I liked a lot of the beats on there. I didn't think like the songs overall were as good as on the Infamous, if you know what I'm saying. Like I don't think that the bars and the choruses and stuff like that were as good, but the beats I really liked. And there were some tracks that I did like uh on Hell on Earth, but yeah. In fact, it's a beat from Hell on Earth that I'm rapping over on the track I'm talking about. It's a beat from that album. Abs TV says Kodak Black is actually sick. I thought Kodak was shit at first too. Jason Brown says Kodak Black is awful. You see, that's the generational difference. You see, me and Jason are older guys, and we're saying Kodak Black is shit, but Abs is a younger guy, and he's like, nah, Kodak Black is good. See, the old codgers, we don't get it, man. Because our standards in the 90s and, maybe early 2000s was so different to today. The cultural difference in rap music is just massive compared to how, from if you compare it now to how it used to be. It's just a massive cultural difference, massive difference in the style of music, the flows, the beats, everything is just so different. Yeah, exactly what Errol Spence said. Nowadays, you just have to be a troll with a good personality. Yeah. Errol Spence says, I can't listen to Kodak Black. I just find him dumb and intellectually stupid. When I listen, I feel dumb. That's how I felt when I saw Kodak Black. Like the guy looks like a moron, and he talks and raps like a moron. That's just like, wow, is this what people rate these days? Okay, let them go ahead and listen to this guy, but I can't do it. Jason Brown says it is about skills, Hatman. It's just that the skills have changed. When youngsters hear old school rap, they say the skills are basic. Do they? Jason Brown says, did you only listen to East Coast music? Nah, I listen to some West Coast music as well. I used to listen to like the Alcoholics, Razkaz, people like that. I guess they were West Coast guys who rapped like they were East Coast. But I also listened to Dre, NWA, Ice Cube, the early Ice Cube. I like the America's Most Wanted album. I was never a Tupac fan. Abs TV says he's a talented artist, trust me. But he's an ignorant guy though, right? I'm not sure I could be into the guy's music. And it's too young for me anyway, man. That generation of music is just the stuff they're talking about in general is not really gonna appeal to a man my age. And when it comes to the music of the 90s, obviously it was produced by young people, but there's nostalgia there, right? Because that's when I was young. Henry Atkins says Prodigy, Nas, Wu, Guru. Okay, talking about some old school. Ab says, give us your top five shittest rappers of today list and list the top five rappers. I couldn't tell you the top five shittest because I don't know all the rappers like that, and most of them sound shit to me. So I couldn't give you top five shit today. But in terms of like top five best rappers, I couldn't give that today either. I could only give you maybe like top five of all time or back in the days. And even that'd be hard because there's so many rappers I liked. And how do you judge who's in the top five? Do you just go on how good they were when they were at their best, or do you go by consistency over a long career? Like, what do you go by? Felix says, I'm in my 20s, but I have never liked any of these new rappers. All the beats sound the same, their flow is fucking horrible, and their lyrics are horrendous. Like, it is difficult when you get older. You start feeling like you're becoming the very kind of person who you used to, um, the, when I was young, my parents' generation used to tell us that our music was garbage. Do you understand? And probably their parents told them the same thing. So I'm concerned about falling into that trap. All right, maybe it's natural that I'm gonna fall into that because of the way that culture and society is changing so rapidly. Because this is unprecedented. Culture is not supposed to change this rapidly. Yeah, from generation to generation, the culture and the style of music is not supposed to change this rapidly. This is a new phenomenon for human beings. It normally takes much longer for trends and music, etc., to change. But in the modern age, with social media, with mass media, culture can change like in a couple of years. So this what we're going through, what we're living through, is not normal. If you go to, like, I think I mentioned this before, traditional or primitive cultures, right? Like hunter-gatherer tribes that live in the Amazon, they sing the same songs and play the same songs that their great 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 grandparents were singing and playing. They pass on songs, traditional songs, through the generations, sometimes hundreds of years. You understand? Like, their culture doesn't change that much. Their tradition, so, and therefore they don't really have generational conflict in them primitive societies the way that we do in so-called civilized society. We have generational conflict because the culture is changing so rapidly that one generation is completely out of touch with the other generation. But yeah, the new rappers, the beats all sound the same to me. It's all auto-tune singing with auto-tune choruses, and that's another thing as well. It's like, do people even know what a real human voice sounds like anymore? Because everything is auto-tuned. And that to me is part of the transhumanism agenda, to merge human beings with machines. Then now all the music you listen to, you're listening to a robot voice. You're not even listening to the real voice of a human being. So when they perform on stage, I guess they've got the auto tune turned on, right, when they're on stage. So you're not even hearing the real person's voice. The beats are all synthesized. The drums are 808 synthesized drums. The voices are all auto tuned. There's nothing real about it. It's all computer generated. Jason Brown says, not sure if you're aware, but the whole rap industry have turned on Kodak Black because after Nipsey Hussle was murdered, Kodak Black came out saying he'll be a shoulder to cry on, a shoulder for Nipsey's wife to cry on. Well, there you go. I can't listen to somebody who's doing stuff like that. Alright, anyway, time for me to hit the sack, people. But shout out to everybody for joining the live stream. I will be uploading an MP3 of this for anyone who didn't catch it from the beginning. So yeah, look out for that tomorrow or the day after, sometime this week. Big up everybody. I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm out.